human species. And I specifically tend to look at climate change and the human dimensions of climate change through the lens of environmental justice. And so today I'll talk with you about climate justice. And my work has mostly taken place in Northeast India, in the states of Assam and Arunachal Pradesh, which are south of Tibet and north of Bangladesh. But I've also started doing some work in Santa Cruz. So today, as I sort of talk with you about what I think of as climate justice, I'll try to pull examples from my work to give you some sort of real things to link these ideas to. All right, so I was super impressed to see the topic of this art panel being climate justice equals social justice. I think this is a really hard argument that many people don't want to make yet, right? And they're not quite there. And so it's easier to talk about the polar bears and it's easier to talk about the bees. And so I think I was super impressed to see this as the title of the art panel. And what I thought I might do with you today in the time that I have is sort of take on this initial part of this equation, which is climate justice. And what do we mean by that? What is climate justice? What does that entail? And then I'll end by sort of linking that to what we mean by social justice. So here in this picture, you're seeing some of the people that I've worked with for my PhD work. These are flood-affected communities in Northeast India that live in the river basin of the Yarlung Tsampo Brahmaputra, which is a gigantic river, one of the least developed rivers in the world, that starts in Tibet and flows through much of southern Tibet and then takes a really sharp turn into India. It's one of India's largest rivers. And so here you're seeing this woman. This picture I took in August 2014, and she's standing in front of her house. And you can see here, the only thing that's really left is the Bollywood actress poster that's hanging from her walls, but pretty much the rest of the house is gone. And this here in the middle of the image is her well, her water well. So you can really, I feel like this picture really gives you a sense of who is paying the price of climate change, who is really getting hurt. And I'll explain to you a little bit more how climate change fits into this. But this is the image I wanted to start you off with to think about who loses, right? But we also have to ask ourselves who wins, who benefits from climate change. And so I think this is an important component also of thinking about climate justice, not just thinking about the people that bear the biggest brunt, bear the biggest costs of climate change impacts, but also other people have benefited from this, right? And so we know the United States is the second largest emitter as a country. We are one of the wealthiest countries. Our emissions per person, per capita, are extremely high, much higher actually than the average Chinese person or Indian person emissions. And so when we're thinking about who has won from emitting all these gases into the atmosphere and who has benefited and who has improved their own lifestyles and their own economies by creating this gigantic global problem that we now call anthropogenic climate change or global warming, while it's often the rich, the wealthy, the richer countries, the more developed, quote unquote, countries that benefited from the Industrial Revolution really early on. And so we see that the United States and Europe have been contributing to the problem of climate change for so much longer than so many other countries and places and communities. So I wanted to start off by really pointing out that as we talk about all the people who lose and the victims or the survivors of climate change, we can't forget that there are people who are benefiting from this, and they have to be part of the equation also, because if we forget who benefits, then it just seems like this faceless, senseless evil that's happening to us, right? But it's not. It's been brought on by specific actions. And so back to my work in Northeast India, I've been working with communities in the states of Assam and Arunachal Pradesh since 2011, more or less. This is an area that is so unique on so many levels, but the picture at the top here really gets at this idea that the river is considered the lifeline of the region. The river provides tons of ecosystem services for the communities that live here, and these are millions of people that live in this river system. So here you're seeing two youths in Assam fishing out of the river. And these are regions that are very income poor. Their main source of protein comes from fish. So the river is an incredible important source for them of food, of all kinds of products that they use for making their homes, like boulders, like mud. It's used for religious and cultural practices. It's used for giving water to your animals, your livestock. It's used for bathing sometimes, depending on the resources you have available. So there's millions of people who live in this river basin in Northeast India who rely very closely on this river for their livelihood. They're also, as I said, not wealthy people. They are mostly subsistence agriculture. Their agricultural practices are even very sustainable. They don't input very much synthetic fertilizer or any products that you would think of might contribute to climate change, right? They have very low carbon lifestyles. They mostly use manure and they rely on rain to irrigate their agriculture. So if you can think of one of the lowest sort of carbon intensive lifestyles, this might be it, right? Subsistence agriculture in flood affected communities in Northeast India. So they're not contributing much to the problem of climate change. Below again is the same woman that you saw earlier, another picture of her standing in front of her house. You see the water still stagnating there, so hasn't even fully retreated for her to be able to rebuild her life. And so while people in this river basin always talk about the river as their lifeline, they also are very much aware that the river every summer brings incredibly destructive floods. Because of the river system and because so much of the flow of the river is concentrated just in the summer months, we see that every year some of these communities are affected by floods. And what's interesting is that because they rely so much on the river during the year, they have learned to live with floods. I'm not saying it's pretty or it's desirable, but they have learned and they've devised strategies and support networks to manage to live through these summer months. Now, unfortunately, what climate change is doing to their lives is that by warming the temperature and causing glaciers that feed this river to melt faster, so there's more water coming, and changing the monsoon, which is this giant sort of rain phenomenon that happens in Southeast Asia and in other parts. So we're seeing an increase in meltwater joining the river. We're seeing an increase in really heavy rain events in this region. And so we're seeing also an increase in flooding. And what's very sad and worrisome for these communities is to think about, can they continue to live with floods that are getting worse and worse and worse as a result of climate change? And all this thinking about the fact that they don't contribute, right, to greenhouse gas emissions very much at all. They'd barely be a dot on the map if we were to map out their emissions. So this is to think about who bears the cost of climate change impacts. But I also want to briefly mention we have a lot of communities in the United States who bear the cost of climate change and bear the cost of fossil fuels, right? So we have Cancer Alley, which is a stretch from Baton Rouge to New Orleans here in the United States, where there are over 150 petrochemical plants and refineries, and cancer rates are much higher than anywhere else in the country. And this is largely Black communities and low-income communities. We have refineries, right, all over our own states. This is the Bay Area that has 5 refineries. I was trying to look up refineries in Sacramento, and I think you might have Telfer. It's not necessarily a refinery anymore, but it's an asphalt manufacturing plant, which I think may be a big emitter. And so the people that live next to these plants, right, and let me know if anybody knows anything about this Telfer plant or Telfer. The people living next to these places are also suffering the consequences of local air pollution, right? And so these are also things we need to think about as we think about climate justice. And then there's indigenous communities whose lands is so often taken for plans like the Dakota Access Pipeline to move oil across different states from where it is to where people need it. So all these communities we really need to consider when we're thinking about climate change. And just as an end, and I'm not going to take up any more time really, but I want to say that another thing to think about, and we don't talk about this quite as much, is who is part of the solution. And not just who is part of implementing the solution, but who is part of envisioning the solution. How do we think about what are our options when we think about climate change? And who gets to imagine our future, right? And who gets to tell us what our possible options are as we think about climate change? And so more recently, I've been working in Santa Cruz. This is a picture of our main beach. Maybe some of you have visited the boardwalk before that you see here. And I'm working with the city of Santa Cruz now to try to plan and help them plan their coastal resiliency plan. What do they do knowing that sea level rise may completely erode this beach? There might not be anything left here, and we may need to have a giant seawall just to protect the boardwalk. And so we're working with the city of Santa Cruz and trying to think about different solutions for our coast, from things like seawall to things that are much more green, like sand dunes. And specifically what we're doing is trying to work with the most vulnerable and least privileged communities. So Latinx communities that live in our beach flats neighborhood or lower ocean neighborhoods that don't tend to be part of these conversations of what do you want your coastlines to look like in the future? What matters to you? What should we save at all costs, right? And what can we let go of? And so these are just two pictures to show you what a more sort of gray solution of riprap or seawall would look like, versus at the bottom you have a living shoreline. So can we restore dunes instead and try to use our ecosystems to help us against climate change? So the idea here is, how do we bring more voices into the solutions that we're proposing? Because they're gonna mold what the future looks like, these solutions, right? And I think it's important that the vision of the future includes all kinds of voices and people. So I'm just gonna end here. I give you some example of what climate justice looks like. And I think what the topic of this panel is fantastic, because it's so important to say it, that climate change is just a thing that highlights the other issues that we have, right? It's not bringing up completely new issues that we didn't know about before. We have poverty, we have homelessness, we have these things were already here, and climate change just gives us another reason to look at them and realize that these are crises that we need to tackle. And if we are going to tackle climate change, we must absolutely also look at things like poverty, racism, because those mold who gets to be part of the solution. So we can't really tackle climate change if we're not thinking about these social justice issues. So that's what I have for you today. And I will stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Costanza. And next we have our next juror, Anna Davidson. I'll hand it off to you.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Thank you so much, Costanza. That was an amazing talk, and it's a bummer to be going after you. But this is going to be really different. This is I kind of designed it more of an artist talk, and because I'm an artist, but I'm also a scientist. But first of all, thank you so much for having me. It was a delight to be a juror for this show, and there's a lot of talented artists out there, so it was great to see. I'm going to just give you a little bit of background first on how I became interested in the natural world and art, and then talk about more of my recent work dealing with climate justice. So since undergrad, I've always had one foot in the door in science and one foot in the art, and always took classes in everything. But my summers in college were spent in a molecular plant physiology lab where I studied how plants loaded and transported their photosynthetic products. And the more I stared into a microscope and did these complex experiments, the more I started seeing art. So looking at these plant parts in the microscope was super fun. There's so much beauty, different patterns, specific functions for each cell I was looking at, and form and function, like what important terms for everything, but especially in science and art. And these terms followed me as I began to learn about how morphology, what a plant looks like, or an animal, or me, is evolutionarily related to how it functions. And then you go into the molecular and microscales of a plant and begin to understand how environment dictates its morphology, how it looks, and its function. And you can look at its form and function at the finest level. And as our environment changes, so will the morphology and the physiology, the form and the function. So this is a theme that's been in my life, both in my scientific work and artistic work, as well as teaching in the ecological arts. So in the lab, when I was supposed to be focusing on science, I was instead using methods like thin-layer chromatography to make drawings. And I thought I had invented bioart, which little did I know, bioart had already existed for a very long time. When it was time for graduate school, I couldn't decide, plant physiology or art. So I ended up going to UC Davis for a PhD in plant physiology, focusing on climate change effects on trees. And then as soon as I got done with that, I went on to get my MFA in visual arts, both at UC Davis. So during my PhD, and also at the beginning of the MFA, I was really interested in using natural and scientific materials to make work and sort of collaborating with other organisms. And so I would make these large petri dishes, if you will, of potato dextrose agar, which is what the material is to grow fungus or bacteria in a petri dish. And I started painting with them, if you will. I had a palette of different fungi colors and started working with this material pretty obsessively and growing it all in all kinds of ways and literally watching it grow cell by cell. And again, I was like, oh my God, I am making art that starts invisible and becomes visible. Another epiphany that I thought I was having at the time. And so I started doing everything with it, like weaving and quilting and growing the fungal bodies and making sculptures and eating it. And this led to using more natural materials. So living in the Central Valley of California, where most of our big crops are bee pollinated, and also studying at a prolific school for agriculture and ecology, the decline of our bee populations became a pretty important and scary topic. So I started working first with bees that I got from an entomologist, and then building objects out of bee pollinated wood, like a cherry wood, to represent the effects of man on bees and the fact that we rely on them so much. And I started making sculptures with the bees, where I would build an armature and then the bees would make the sculptures. Also, as you know, I'm sure all of you, especially after this year, another imminent threat in California are forest fires, and it's of course projected to worsen. So I started making work about forest fires. This is a piece that I did in the first year of my MFA, where I created a potbelly stove, which is an important object for me. And you could sit down by the potbelly, warm yourself, and also be watching video of California on fire. And so that was to start conversation about forest fires, forest management, et cetera, et cetera. So moving back in time a little bit, I always tell this story because it's sort of what drives me, I guess, to do what I do, and influences my work a lot. So I went on this solo backpacking trip to Chile once, to Torres del Paine in Patagonia. And I was, well, first of all, I slept on my first glacier. I saw and slept on my first glacier, which was really amazing. And I could feel the power of this ice under me. But I also had this really special moment when I was walking across this bridge, and I had this huge heavy backpack on, and I was the only one there. And I'm about in the middle of the bridge when I hear this huge thundering roar, and the bridge starts shaking, and I'm right in the middle. And I look up into this valley and watch an avalanche happen right before my eyes when I'm on this bridge. And it was the most sublime moment of my life. One of the most beautiful and scariest moments, and where Mother Nature sort of put me back on the food chain. And all of my problems I went traveling with sort of dissipated, and I was very humbled. And but it also became, the sublime moment became kind of an addiction. And so I began trying to find ways to get back into this special moment without dying, but trying to figure out how to put myself in these vulnerable situations where I'm totally exposed to the earth in a really raw way. And I wanted to get really primordial and to find this sublime again, to be humbled. So I began this quest and became pretty obsessed with hydrothermal pools in the Atacama Desert in Chile and around the United States and everywhere. I started communicating with my ancestors, the Archaea, and painting with them. And I started exploring my sense of self as animal, as a product of an environment, and exploring where my ancestors came from, the Archaea, and how ill-adapted I am to their environments, and how my morphology has no reason for being there, and how ultimately nature has this dominion, not us, as the Bible tells us. So this is when I started exploring the use of video and place-based work. Moulins have this similar effect on me as hydrothermal pools. Moulins are vertical shafts in a glacier formed by surface water that percolates through a crack in the ice. And I started chasing these moulins around and ice and glaciers, and started working a lot in Alaska. I finally had enough money to get a camera, and a nice camera, and start working at these ice fields. This is the Harding ice field in Alaska. And I did a lot of video and sound recordings and collecting of specimens and all sorts of things. And then I would come back after my expeditions and work in my studio. And so this is a piece that came out of that, which is a video piece that I did at the Harding ice field, shot through hanging slabs of ice. So then I started working inside a giant freezer, creating sculptures out of ice. So that was my studio for a while. These are people that make like ice sculptures for cocktail events and things like that. And this is a piece that came out of that, an example called Ogallala, but this happened right when the Plains All-American Pipeline was, the oil spilled off the coast of Santa Barbara in 2015 happened right during that time. And the Plains All-American was responsible for that. So that sort of, I was mixing ice and oil, which of course melted, which was very beautiful, into a very ugly mess, which is analogous to what really happens in life, right? So I was at this conference at the School for Visual Arts in New York, and I saw this woman named Janet Biggs, an artist, who gave a talk about her experiences making artwork in the Arctic. And I was like, I want to do what she's doing. And so I applied to the Arctic Circle residency, where we lived on this ship for like 3 weeks or a month, and then rode around on the Zodiac to get close to specific places. But this was in Svalbard, Norway, where we cruised around this archipelago and these fjords in this sailboat, and then eventually sailed all the way to the pack ice of the North Pole. And so I would be collecting everything on this expedition. This is me making cyanotypes from North Pole pack ice, for example. And these are some images that came out from that time. And this was a video piece that's 11 minutes from that time. And it actually ends with this really skinny polar bear that I filmed there that was hunting on land, which should have been hunting on ice in the ocean. And it was very skinny and probably didn't survive that season. And then coming back to the studio, making three-dimensional objects, inspired by glaciers and icebergs. So at the time when I was making that video, I was at Residency, art residency program in California, and got hooked up with this Ocean Memory Project, which are a bunch of people all over the country and world, poets, artists, oceanographers, chemists, all these people who are working on the same question: does the ocean have a memory? And I met this oceanographer who was talking about the Lost City hydrothermal vent system, which is where most oceanographers think that life first started. So the Lost City hydrothermal vent system is literally halfway between Africa and the United States. And I was able to go on the expedition with them. And so the discovery of, so many hydrothermal vent systems are known around the world, but the discovery of this particular site occurred in the 1970s, and it provided the first evidence that the sun wasn't the only source of energy that living organisms could harness. And it expanded our knowledge from photosynthesis to chemosynthesis, pointing to an ocean of unfathomable forms of biology waiting to be discovered. So anyway, this Lost City hydrothermal vent system has been featured in a lot of studies on the origin of life, and its microbiology serves as an analog to life that could exist on Earth. So there's lots of studies about it. And another thing about this site is it has this unique scientific and cultural value that has brought the Lost City under consideration for special protection by the UNESCO World Heritage Center and the International Union for Conservation of Nature. However, I was astonished to learn while on this boat that the Lost City is also included in a parcel of seafloor that the International Seabed Authority has approved for deep sea mining exploration by a Polish mining company. So that's right. 30 men wearing suits are doling out the seafloor to the highest bidder behind closed doors. I had no idea. And it's, these hydrothermal vent systems are particularly vulnerable because, especially the black smokers, because they puff out these the precious metals from the Earth's mantle, and when they hit the ocean water, they become these little metal nodules, and these companies want to come and scrape for these little metal nodules and ruin the ecosystem around it. So that sort of turned into my project. So this is the boat that we're on. This is the Atlantis that's operated by Woods Hole. And there are about 50 people on the boat, 25 scientists and 25 crew, and I was the only artist. And this is Jason, our remote control vehicle that we put down to the Lost City. This is a submarine. That year, there were a lot of what do you call these things? Hurricanes that we had to dodge, 4 of them in the Atlantic. And so that was really interesting. But once we got to the site, we stopped puking, and it was pretty relaxing. And this was sort of my studio that I set up, and I would draw what I saw out of my porthole every single day as an example of things that I would record. Also sounds, of course, lots of video, and then a lot of scientific data that was taken by the scientists. This is the Jason control room where we sat and watched the dive into these amazing places into the lost city. So these are stills from a video that I made while being here. So that is the end of my slideshow, and I will stop sharing. But I wanted to show you some specific examples of where artists can go and what they can do outside of the studio.
Thank you, Anna. That was amazing to see all the different places that you have gone, especially in pursuit of, feeding your inspiration for your work about the environment. So thank you for that. It's very much appreciated. And Costanza, thank you as well. I'm hoping that you are back on now after a few little technical difficulties. And we're going to move into our Q&A portion of our event this evening, which I'm very excited about, and turn to some discussion. So if you have questions that you would like to pose to our speakers, you can either put them into the chat, or you can also use the function if you're viewing this through the FOTA designed website. There is a small box to your right where you can also enter the questions, and we will be able to view those as they come in. Hi, Costanza. Let me see here. I'm going to unspotlight Anna for a minute so we can see everyone who talks. Okay, there we go. Should we go ahead and, Kristen, do you want to pose the first question, or would you like me to do that?
Go for it, and then I'll go after
Right,
you.
sounds good. So Costanza, you did a really good job of sort of defining what you felt like what you see as the definition of climate justice. And Anna, I was hoping that you would maybe just share what that what that term sort of means to you and how you do or do not apply that to your work. Oops, you're muted, Anna.
I think the main thing with climate justice is just, calling attention, taking action, and holding the polluters and the policymakers accountable. Like, I had no idea that 30 men are doling out the ocean floor to the highest bidder. I didn't even know the ocean floor belonged to anyone. And that was a really big surprise to me. And so, I know that art doesn't necessarily have a job that it has to do, but in this particular case, I'm hoping that my artwork will call attention to these men. Who are these men? And what are they doing? What do they think they're doing? And calling attention to deep sea mining and struggling with the fact that we need these tiny metal nodules to run our computers, and so we can Zoom. But mostly, I think, climate justice means we need to hold the people who are doing the damage accountable, and it's not just the people that are suffering, but it's our landscape, it's the plants, it's the trees, it's the animals too. And so when I think about climate justice equals social justice, there's so much more than just people as well. And also in terms of holding the policymakers accountable, making sure that they're telling the truth and voting people in that respond to science and that are reporting the truth and not false information and for profiting. And so I think that's the main thing.
Thank you. Costanza, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Can't believe I missed the last bit of Anna's presentation. Also, I'm sorry, I can't seem to turn on my video back on because of the settings, but I think I'm back to my computer. The last thing I saw was the ice, and I think it was were those wells that were filled with oil? I was like, well, I want to know more. And then I lost you all. So that's what I have to add, because I'm sorry, I don't know what happened in the last bit of conversation, to be honest with you. But
Sorry. Well, I'm glad you're back. Your video should be back on now. I think I just turned the setting on for that. There you are. Great. So Anna was talking about her sort of perspective on climate justice, and I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to add in addition to what you gave us in your presentation, which was very straightforward and a very clear definition, I think. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think, I could give this talk in like an hour version, in a 25 days version, in like a 10-minute version. So there's always more I could add. I think what I'd like to see happen is shifting our attention as a community, academic, practitioner community, towards looking at the solutions that we're thinking about for climate change, and looking at the injustices in those solutions now. Because I think that there's been a lot of literature around who pays the price, who suffers, who wins. And now that we are really heavily focused on thinking about solutions, whether they're mitigation solutions to reduce the problem and reduce the emissions, or how do we adapt to the changes that are going to happen, there's a lot of injustices within that too. And who gets to make the solution, what solutions are implemented, where they're implemented. And so I think that many people in the climate field are certainly more excited about this new administration than the former one. But we need to be really careful. And I think we need to keep our eyes really open as to what decisions will be made in the name of climate change crisis, because these things are used to then implement solutions that we may not like. And I think we need to be part of that conversation, and not just green energy is great. Where are we citing this green energy? Why there? And so I think I'd like to see more of that happening within the field. And it's happening. I think we've just spent a lot of time thinking about the issues and less about the solutions, and assume the solutions would be more just than the issue, but they aren't necessarily, unless we make that a commitment.
Thank you. And I'm going to bounce it back to you, Costanza, and to Anna as well. So, Anna mentioned that there was that particular moment on that bridge that kind of shaped a lot of her work. Is there a particular moment or experience that you could identify, Costanza, that helped define the direction of your research and environmental pursuits?
There is. Hurricane Katrina which happened in 2005, which now feels like so long ago. And it's so funny because when I talk about it with my students, like for some of them, it happened like prior to when they were even, they were so young. It's not even part of their memory, a collective memory. But I spent a summer gutting homes after Hurricane Katrina and picking up people's belongings out of their houses and their drenched pictures of their families, picture books. And I think that was a very telling experience of because I actually went and I did this a year after Katrina. So a whole year had passed and I was still pulling pots out of people's cupboards that were filled with water. And so just to think about would this ever happen here, right? Would we really be a year into with houses completely destroyed, with stagnant flood water still in pots? And so I think that for me was really when I started thinking about, why are people not able to leave a town when there is a hurricane, right? Most people would want to get themselves out of safety, out of harm's way. And why is it that a year later, some people still can't come back to their home, still can't even begin to rebuild it, right? So I think that was for me the big moment that was ugh. And then floods have somehow been a theme throughout my life, which chose me. I didn't choose floods, but Hurricane Katrina, and then just seeing a lot of similarities, just seeing these same things happen in different places under different names, but a lot of the same, injustices, really.
Thank you. Yeah, and I've been learning a lot about floods and mold lately, and how, mold can impact these communities and health issues for years and years to come. So it's multifaceted. Anna, besides that moment on the bridge, is there another particular moment in time that you can pinpoint that shaped the direction of your work? You're muted.
Just traveling, a lot to I guess when I was flying over Borneo, I saw all of the palm oil fields and went and, saw that the orangutans were, had this little tiny section left, and you had to pay to watch to see them, and they were like being fed bananas and stuff. And then everybody was taking pictures. And that was a pretty pivotal moment. And I don't know, living in West Sacramento and walking on the river every day, seeing Tent City is, it's just every day. It's all day, constantly. It's just so much. There's so just everywhere. So there's no particular moment, I guess.
Thank you.
I just have to say that both of your stories, just about those moments, both in after Katrina and the avalanche that you experienced, they gave me the chills. I was like, that's sort of the power of nature before you, and understanding, humanity's sort of place in that. I think is both overwhelming, inspiring, and obviously a very pivotal moment for both of you. So, and I wanted to see if you wanted to expand on this a little bit, and that both of you really have traveled quite a bit to places that many of us haven't been able to go. And I'm just curious how that perspective and that larger worldview has really influenced how you've approached the environment and climate change in general. Do you want to go first, Anna, or Costanza? Either one.
Well, I grew up in a town of 300 in a white conservative farming community in rural Illinois, where I am today. And we didn't even have a library. There was no such thing as art anywhere. And so as we approached our later high school years, we were just dying to get out and study abroad and go to college and study abroad again and study abroad again. And just this eagerness of to learn was really important for me. And if I wouldn't have left home, I don't think I would have, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now. But visiting these other places, especially places like Bangladesh or the Arctic, which both very vulnerable places in the world, just really can shock you when you're used to seeing only cornfields. And so I think while it's ironic, and I struggle a lot with being a tourist and taking planes and boats and things like this to do my work, I think it's incredibly important to travel. I mean, Rick Steves is one of my heroes. And I think it's just the most educational experience you can have, way more important to spend a week in another country than in a year in college, for sure.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. So, yeah, I guess one of the things, one thing that always strikes me is how similar things are in different places. And then, I think there's some expression around that, around how traveling allows you to come back and see your same life with different eyes, right? So I think that's huge. I find that because I like to think about adaptation and human adaptation, kind of like what Anna was talking about, how do species become morphologically how they are based on their environment, right? There's this huge literature on human adaptation over time, and that basically you could almost define all culture just based on how we've adapted to our environment, right? Which is a very simplistic way of looking at it. But what I like about traveling is thinking about human adaptation creates similar things in completely different places, and also creates totally different solutions in the very same place, because people are so different. And so there are completely different solutions to living with floods within the same small village in Assam. One community, the missing community, always they create these stilted homes using bamboo, and other communities will not use that because it is not part of their identity, and use different kinds of ways to raise their homes, because cultural appropriateness is so important, even on such a small scale. But then you can also look across the world and see stilted houses, and these same communities that have been in floodplains in Assam have also lived in Bangladesh. There are communities that have lived with floods all over in South Asia. And so just so interesting to me to think about the similarities and how similar we can be in the ways that we all strive to adapt to our environment, when we're in another work environment, household environment, right? Environment. And then in the same ways, how we can be so different in such a small scale at how we tackle these same issues. So I think that's probably one of the things that I like the most about traveling these days, at least. And the food.
And Costanza, you have a question in the chat. If you have relatives in Perugia, Italy.
That's a good question. I'll have to ask my mom. I was raised in Italy. I was raised in Milano, but my families were funny. When people ask us where you're from, when they hear us talk as a family, we all give different places, and they're like, "Are you okay? Are you sure?" So I don't know if I have relatives in Perugia right now. I know I have a lot of friends in Rome and families there and in Milano, but I'll let you know. I'll try to find out.
So we would like to invite our audience now. If you do want to turn on your videos, please do, because it will help us feel like we're more of a community tonight. And we'd like to see your faces. So please feel free to do that. And you can also use your reactions if you want to ask a question in person. Otherwise, we invite you to put your questions into the chat so we can have them answered for you.
While we wait for some more questions to come in, we did have one come in, and I'll open it up to either one of you. So colonialism often shapes the environmental and climate movement. How can we make sure that BIPOC are included in decision-making, legislation process, and the movement?
Yes, we have to vote better people in who represent those communities is a big thing. And absolutely, the whole environmental movement has been like ridiculously white, right? I mean, it was a lot of it, and colonialism, white supremacy, all of it is so embedded in the way we think about the environment, either as like this thing that we need to subdue and dominate from this very like Catholic Christianity kind of point of view. So I think, I think that it's so hard. How do you change the root of a system, right? Like the whole premise of the environmental system here was based on white people wanting to save their little Garden of Eden from the toughness of a city life, right? And like escaping the illnesses of society by saving the environment. But we also know that isn't environmentalism in a lot of other places. And so we can look to other examples and BIPOC communities and Native communities that have for a very long time stewarded their lands and defended them against change, outside development efforts. So I always like to talk to my students about the Chipko movement, which started in North India, in Uttarakhand in the 70s. And it wasn't trying to just save the forest, but it was trying to save people's access to these forests. And so as the Indian government was opening up forestry and these forested land to private companies to go log them, women from these villages chained themselves to the trees. And that's where the tree hugger term comes from. And most people don't even know that. And so this Chipko movement of these Indian women, rural women that were, and the whole thing has been co-opted. First of all, nobody knows the origin of this. Two, people think that they didn't want the trees cut at all, right? That it's all about just saving nature and keeping people out of it. And that was never the intention of that movement. It was always to say, these local communities have always relied on these forests and forest products. Why are you letting these giant transnational, or not transnational, but these giant forces come and develop the forest and cut it down, and not letting local people take advantage of their own ecosystem and benefit from it? So I think there are so many examples that we just forget and have been left out of our telling of the environmental story and of the climate story. And we can bring them back, but I think we also have to do that effort. Like I have to re-educate myself, right? I have a training in environmental studies. All my professors were white in my undergrad and my PhD mostly. So I also don't have that knowledge necessarily as part of my teaching tools, right? I know it's there and I have to do my own research to bring these stories back into my own teaching. But they've been erased systematically. So it's a hard one.
Anna, did you want to chime in on that question?
No, I think it was already answered perfectly.
I agree. And Genesis, the mayor, asked in the chat, Anna, what was your list of, do you have a list of recommendations for other artists to get involved in research expeditions similar to yours?
The mayor. We were curious about the mayor when we were.
Hello, how are you?
Hi. Do I have a list about expeditions? No, I don't have a list, but I'm sure that there's a list out there. If you like Google artist expeditions, I do know that there is one. If you want to be an artist on a boat, there's a lot of art residencies on boats. I don't know. I don't know what it's called, but you could probably Google like just artist residencies on boats or something.
Okay, I think my question was because I think at the end of your presentation, you were going to reference some recommendations for artists. Maybe I mistook that for the research expeditions. But I thought I heard you say that you had you wanted to go over some kind of list of recommendations for artists.
I don't remember saying that, but then again, I'm kind of in a fog. But I think what I was saying is that I just wanted to make it known because I didn't know as a young artist, especially in undergrad, how many opportunities there are for artists to join expeditions because let's face it, a lot of our funding, especially for like marine science, goes only to scientists or for funding for space, you know, pretty much only goes to astronauts and science, right? And artists don't have a lot of or historically haven't had a lot of opportunity to be able to access like the deep ocean or space or jungles. But I think that that's changing now. And I didn't know that as a young artist until I just started like squeezing my way in where I could and like begging people to join them. But now I think that there's, you know, like the National Endowment of the Arts and National Science Foundation certainly has like, and other scientific funding agencies have recognized the importance of arts, of the arts and sciences, and have, you know, allocated money for art to support artists. But I don't have a specific list.
Okay, well, thank you.
Sorry.
No, that was a great answer. Thank you.
The mayor, I was just going to say, I think that's actually a really great list that should be compiled. It may exist somewhere because I do know that, you know, I've interacted with a number of artists who have said they've been embedded in some sort of scientific either expedition or there's a project happening in a certain type of the world where they're surrounded by not just artists. It's not a residency just meant for practicing artists, but they interact a lot with scientists. So I think there are definitely more opportunities now than there used to be for these types of events.
Also, I think that instead of going the route like looking for opportunities online or whatever, just like asking yourself, okay, do I have a question? Am I interested in life on Mars? And I want to make art about life on Mars. Well, then you go and look up who's teaching astronomy or whatever at Sac State and start with that college professor. And then that person will lead you to the next person. And then the next thing you know, you're on top of Hawaii on a mountain looking up at the stars, doing an artist residency there or something. And then maybe you'll be in space someday. But like, I think it's just starts with the question and then just talking to people and hanging out with those people who know about that question and like being a blood sucker on them. Like, don't let go.
Agree. Someone has to make the statues on Mars, right? That expedition that Elon Musk is working on.
I guess someone,
All right. So I think what might be our last question, unless we get another one in our chat here. For each of you, for, Anna and Costanza, what would be your call to action? So if you wanted to sort of make your stand today about what you would invite individuals to do to really help, what can they do to make a difference? If you have a specific one or a more general one.
I guess I've been focused personally, my call to action has been trying to change the education system, the art education system. I think that the arts have a very crucial leadership role to play in our global cultural dialogue as we struggle with these pressing issues like climate change, environmental degradation, food security, health, migration, racism, economic inequality. And it's increasingly recognized that solutions to these environmental problems need to include a human element and that culture and nature coexist across a continuum. And now more than ever, we need the arts to help us make sense of all this. I think processing emotional responses is as important as synthesizing factual information or calling attention to an issue. I think that the efficacy of the arts in this regard is indisputable, and combined with other disciplines like field ecology or climate science creates a real powerful opportunity for learning and action. And to paraphrase Bill Gilbert, who started the University of New Mexico Art and Ecology program, he said to teach and treat art as a discrete discipline involved in a closed conversation with its own history, removed from the larger social and environmental context, no longer makes sense. And that really resonates with me. To focus on fleeting moments of popular culture when the issues encompass the expanse of planetary time is to miss the point. And I just think that like we need a whole redo. So my call to action is sort of changing our education system, tearing down the disciplines, and working towards projects in an interdisciplinary way. And so I guess I would encourage other people to start with education and vote for people who voting for people who lean on the right side of history, pro-environment.
Thank you. Costanza?
Yeah, I guess what I would have said was just, and what I tell my students is use your skills. What are you good at? And take that and then use it that's your voice, right? And so if your voice is art, use your art to tell that story that needs to be told and to put pressure on people in power, right? There are few of them, they're more powerful than us, they have more money, but there's so many more of us. We have so many more voices. And if we're loud and if we keep at it, it's not fun. Like it'd be more fun to be the rich, really wealthy ones who just have to go by, right? But like, since we're on this side of things, Yeah, I mean, I can't stress enough how being involved in your local politics, even, it doesn't have to be federal. Like, you can go to your city council meeting, go to your water board meetings. Like, you can be so involved in your local politics and make an impact. And if federal climate action feels like it's getting you down because there's nothing fun to see, don't look at that scale of the issue. Look at it at your own community level. And if your art is your voice or one of your voices, then use that to talk to your people, right? Find your audiences. You can't talk to everybody. Not everybody will listen to you. Not all my students are going to like me, right? Some are going to love me and they're going to learn so much from me, and the other ones are not. And so find those people. I mean, I don't know, I can't kick out the students who don't like me, but who are your audiences? Who are the people who will listen to you? Is it your church group? Is it, I mean, I'm not just talking family and friends. Like, who are your people that will listen to you because you look like them, sound like him, believe in the same things as them? And then take them as your audience and talk to them about climate change and use your art or use whatever other skills you have. I mean, I think we really need to move away from talking about climate change as a scientific issue, right? Like, we really need to take it into the realm of the arts and the humanities and the politics. And that's where it's at. That's where the issue's at. We know the climate science. We don't need to, I mean, that's done, right? I mean, we can keep studying it, but we know that. So what you all are doing is the next phase, I think.
Thank you. That was a brilliant answer, both of you. We are going to move on now to announce our award winners for the Climate Justice Equals Social Justice exhibition. So I want to thank both of our guest jurors for being here tonight. You may feel free to chime in about the selections if you like. Otherwise, we're just going to read the artists' statements that they submitted with their works to give our audience a little broader context about how they felt their work applied to this juried exhibition. So take it away, Kristen.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we are going to start with best use of sustainability in design. And our winner is Zoe Nelson, and their piece is called The Weight of It All. Zoe is an art studio major with a focus in ceramics. Their sculpture, The Weight of It All, focuses on climate change, focusing particularly on deforestation for industrialization. This piece reflects sustainability because it was created with recycled clay, painted with stain, and fired only once to reduce kiln emissions. Congratulations, Zoe. Next up, we have Best Community Engagement. And we have Elaine Insua, and their piece is titled Asian Hate Crimes. Noel Quintina. I apologize if I'm butchering that. Elaine is a studio art major with a concentration in ceramics. As a Filipino-American woman, Elaine feels the fear and unrest of their community, as well as for the safety of their family in the Bay with the recent spike in Asian hate crimes. Their work pays tribute to the fallen and to hopefully bring the light the fact that ignorance and false news brings about violence and pain to the most vulnerable. Congratulations, Elaine. Next up, we have best use of recycled or sustainable material, and Ember DeBoer. Ember's work utilizes entirely upcycled material to explore the human condition. Their body of work focuses on the human condition through the lens of identity, thought processes, and cognitive dissonance, the things individuals accrue to navigate and cope with the state of reality. This piece is a relic from the future, inspiring a moment of understanding for what we have and all that we take for granted. Congratulations, Ember. And thank you, Costanza and Anna, for the rounds of applause. Next up, we have Best Call to Action. And for B. Marie, at their music video, Getting It. B. Marie is an environmental artist studying sustainability and communication who is making music to save the bees. Their goal is to utilize their education and artistic endeavors to creatively educate people about environmental issues and solutions. Climate change has huge impacts on bees and food production. Their song, Gettin' It, is a wasteland theme music video which represents what our world would become without bees. Congratulations, Bee Marie.
I meant to do a shout out to Bee Marie while I was talking about my bee piece in my presentation, and I forgot. So there it is.
Shout it out. Okay, next we have our honorable mention, and we have Ryan Menner, Camp Hope Loss. Ryan is majoring in studio arts, working towards a BFA. Their piece shows how society pushes the homeless and the unwanted out further away from civilization, turning away from them. This piece shows how within time, eventually our cities could become flooded, turning themselves into the lost civilization of Atlantis. Congratulations, Ryan.
I love this piece.
It's really good. Okay, and next up we have Best Expression of Social Justice and Environmental Justice by Gina Gessinger. Gina is an artist who aims to create a strong identity so that their audience can connect with the authenticity they put into their work. Their submission includes 2 paintings of Greg Torolla, a Sacramento local. He had recently become homeless around November of 2020, just when the harsh winter weather started to take effects on the city of Sacramento. He was found dead on a 37-degree morning, wrapped in cold blankets soaked from the previous night's rain. Greg Torolla struggled through life with medical conditions, including epilepsy and an overall lack of help and resources. He was interviewed 3 days before he died about the need for warming centers and the city's strict requirements for opening them. Gina's paintings are not only created with the intent to spark conversation on the harsher winter effects from global warming, but also to help the viewer see this man as a fellow human being. Congratulations, Gina. And with that, we'd like to present our Best in Show, which also goes to Gina Gessinger, whose description I just read. And Costanza or Anna, if you'd like to chime in on why this was chosen as Best in Show.
I would like to share that just 2 days ago, my very first master's student ever finished and defended her thesis about homelessness and climate change. And so when I saw this, it spoke so much to me and to so much of the work that I'm interested in doing, and really thinking about like the people who are least thought of, that are so often forgotten, right? Even when we think about the most vulnerable, people that are houseless, that sleep and live outside, kind of fall through even that crack, right? Of like the most vulnerable groups consideration. And so I thought this was amazing. I mean, sad and it just, yeah. And my student used it in her presentation and also told the story of Greg Torolla. So I think that was really great. And I love this piece so much, Gina. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that, not only was it very impactful and I mean clearly hit the nail on the head with the theme of the show, and like hit all of like the jurors what do you call it,
Criteria.
Yes, thank you. You know, it's really well done. And I mean, obviously, Gina, you have a lot of skill and talent in painting. So congratulations on both fronts.
And Gina, I know you're here with us, so if you want to turn your video on and say anything, if not, no worries at all, but congratulations.
I just want to say thank you. I feel really honored, and all the pieces were really touching, and this is just a topic I feel passionate about, so this is a really cool opportunity to be a part of.
Thank you. Yeah, I bawled my eyes out when I read your description and saw this. It's so incredibly touching. So with that, thank you so much to all of the student artists who submitted their work. Your I mean, I can only speak for myself, and I know that Kelly feels the same, and that we were blown away by the amount of submissions and the level of talent and just the vast diversity of what was represented. So thank you all so much. And to our guest jurors, Anna and Costanza, thank you so much for sharing your work and your passions with this group this evening. The Climate Justice, Social Justice exhibit will be on view on the University Gallery's website from now until May 1st. And that is linked right here on this slide. And also the award winners that were shared this evening will be showcased physically on campus, fingers crossed, during the month of October 2021 for Campus Sustainability Month.
I just want to chime in and again, thank all the students who submitted their work. It's always, I think you have to be brave to be able to submit your work to these types of events. And so we really applaud you for doing that. And thank you for joining us for tonight as well. The award winners, we'll get listed on the website as well. So if you check back to see the entire exhibition, they will be listed there when you take a look. So thank you.
Also, cheers to the curators and the organizers of the entire event. No one has thanked you yet. So congratulations to you all.
Well, thank you, Anna. We appreciate that. And quickly, I think we also, since we're doing thank yous, I want to thank our two students who worked tirelessly on this project with us, and that's Lindsay Abernathy and Denise Benitez Gonzalez, who have been working behind the scenes tonight to let everyone in to our Zoom meeting, as well as helping us to really make sure this was a successful project. So thank you, you two. And thank you for joining us tonight. I think that is the end of our programming at this point.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
And yeah, great job. This was fantastic. Thanks to all the submissions. It was a pleasure getting to review them.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Thank you.
Go do your action. Go take action.
And just so you know, this event was recorded and will be available later through the month of April for people to view if you wanted to rewatch any portion of this or share this with friends and family. Thank you, everyone.